Abraham Shakespeare won the lottery jackpot, his life changing in an instant. But not long after, he mysteriously disappeared. People said that he was surrounded by money hunters who saw him as nothing more than a cash cow. And then Didi Moore appeared, a successful businesswoman who claimed to be Abraham's trustworthy friend. But was she really helping him? Or was there something darker hidden behind the facade? Plant City, Florida, January 26, 2010. One of the biggest mysteries in Tampa's history was about to be revealed. Dozens of reporters crowded together. Camera lenses pointed directly at a piece of land being excavated. Everyone was waiting for the answer to the question that had haunted the public for months. Abraham Shakespeare, the lottery millionaire who had vanished without a trace, was he still alive or already dead? 3 years after his life-changing win, Abraham suddenly went missing, and no one knew where he was. In November 2009, his family reported him to the police, but no one had any leads on his whereabouts. Nearly 2 months later, the case took a chilling turn. A mysterious excavation began after the police received information from none other than Abraham's close friend and financial advisor, Didi Moore. There were up to 30, maybe even 40 news crews gathered at the scene, eager to capture the first glimpse of what could be the ultimate proof of Abraham Shakespeare's fate. And as the last layer of soil was lifted, the truth began to emerge. Born in 1972 in Plant City, Florida, Doris Donegan, also known as Didi, always longed for a better life. As a child, she was an active member of women's Bible study classes, but as she grew older, she started feeling that something was missing. She became increasingly aware of her humble origins, a reality she tried to hide throughout her high school years. But instead of letting poverty hold her back, Didi nurtured an unrelenting determination. She was going to succeed at all costs. After graduating, Didi enrolled in training courses and became a certified nursing assistant, CNA. Not long after, she married James Moore, a man from Plant City, and 3 years later, they welcomed a son. But Didi didn't want to settle for a stable job. She wanted more. In 2004, fueled by her burning ambition, Didi started her own business and quickly found success. From a girl who grew up in poverty, she rose to become a wealthy and powerful woman. But Didi wasn't satisfied with simply enjoying her riches. She wanted to share her story, to inspire others with her journey from rags to riches by writing a book. And then, fate led her to Abraham Shakespeare, the man who had won millions in the lottery. This encounter not only changed Didi's life, but also marked the beginning of a horrifying mystery. Abraham Shakespeare grew up in Lakeland, Florida, in circumstances even harsher than Didi. He dropped out of school early, but instead of following the path of many other young men in the neighborhood who fell into gangs or drug addiction, Abraham chose to become a hard-working laborer. He was not an addict, nor was he a criminal, but his life seemed destined to be a constant struggle with meager wages. Until one day, everything changed. In October 2006, in a rare moment of luck, Abraham bought a lottery ticket at a convenience store. And no one could have imagined that the ticket would win him a $30 million jackpot. Choosing to receive a lump sum payment after taxes, Abraham took home approximately $12.7 million. From a manual laborer, he stepped into the world of millionaires. He bought a mansion in an upscale neighborhood, purchased a fleet of BMWs worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But fortune came quickly and disappeared just as fast. In less than 2 years of spending and generously lending money to friends, Abraham's bank account rapidly dwindled. By the end of 2008, when he met Didi Moore, he had only a little over $1 million left. This meeting was no coincidence. A mutual friend had arranged for Didi to meet Abraham, and immediately Didi realized he didn't need a writer to tell his story. He needed a financial manager. And Didi, with her extensive business experience, was ready to take on that role. Before long, Didi was not only helping Abraham manage his finances, but also assisting him in recovering up to $8 million stat he had lent to friends over the past 2 years. But did Didi truly want to help Abraham, or did she have an entirely different plan? This question could only be answered by the horrifying truth that followed. On November 2009, a man named Cedric Adama walked into the police station with growing concern. His cousin, Abraham Shakespeare, the man whose life had changed after winning millions from the Florida lottery, had vanished without a trace. Cedric was not the only one who had borrowed money from Abraham, but unlike many others, he claimed to have fully repaid his debt. However, what was strange was that for the past 8 months, Cedric had not directly returned the money to Abraham, but had instead transferred it to a woman named Didi Moore. And now, after 7 months without any news from his cousin, Cedric decided to report Abraham's disappearance to the police. The police immediately launched an investigation, and the first person they sought out was Didi Moore. At that time, Didi had recently divorced, but more significantly, she had moved into the multi-million-dollar mansion that previously belonged to Abraham Shakespeare. When asked, Didi showed no signs of worry or secrecy. She explained that Abraham had voluntarily sold the house to her at his own request. Not only that, but he had also given her full control over most of his assets. She even provided a signed power of attorney from Abraham to prove her statement. Didi enthusiastically cooperated, providing all financial records related to Abraham. But there was one crucial question she could not answer. Where exactly was Abraham Shakespeare? According to Didi, Abraham had decided to keep his whereabouts a secret, even from her. But she insisted she was still in contact with him. To prove it right in front of the investigators, Didi pulled out her phone and sent a message. Abraham, everyone is looking for you. Please respond immediately. While waiting for a response from Abraham, the investigation team expanded their search. They began reaching out to his friends and family for clues. But what shocked the police was that no one had seen or heard from Abraham in months, not even his own mother, who hadn't seen her son for a long time. However, even though no one had actually made contact with Abraham, they heard countless rumors about him. Some people said he was in Jamaica. Others believed he was hiding in Orlando. But when the police traced the origins of these rumors, they discovered one common point. They all came from Didi Moore. The question arose, was Didi really helping Abraham hide for some reason, or was she concealing a more horrifying truth? In the following weeks, as investigators closely monitored Didi Moore, everything started shifting from strange to suspicious. The deeper the detectives investigated, the more they felt something was wrong. Initially, they thought this was just a missing person case, but over time, a more terrifying suspicion emerged. Was Abraham Shakespeare even still alive? A crucial discovery surfaced on April 6, the time Abraham was believed to have disappeared. Before that, his phone had been working normally, but after that day, everything abruptly changed. Abraham's phone wasn't completely silent, but investigators noticed something odd. Every time Abraham sent a message or contacted Didi, both phones connected to the same cell tower. This couldn't be a coincidence. It suggested that Didi Moore was likely in possession of Abraham's phone and was using it to mislead people. But even though they suspected her, there was still no direct evidence proving that Didi had killed him. So was Abraham really in hiding, or had something terrible happened? 2 days before Christmas, after months without any sign of Abraham, the police decided to confront Didi once again this time. They wouldn't let her easily escape their tough questions, and this time they were determined to make her tell the truth. On Christmas Eve 2009, after more than 8 months of disappearance, something unexpected happened. It seemed that someone other than Didi Moore had finally heard from Abraham Shakespeare. Abraham's mother received a mysterious phone call. The voice on the line claimed to be her son, but the call ended quickly. Even stranger? The call came from a private number, making it untraceable. Less than 24 hours later, investigators took action. They tracked the GPS signal from the phone call and traced it to a shopping mall in Lakeland. Without hesitation, they rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they spotted something familiar, Didi Moore's car parked in the lot. At that moment, Didi was meeting a man, handing him something before quickly leaving. Investigators immediately approached. Could this be the elusive Abraham Shakespeare they had been searching for? But as they got closer, they quickly realized a shocking truth. The man in the car was not Abraham. It was Greg Smith. When questioned, Greg revealed that Didi had just paid him $5,000 to call Abraham's mother and pretend to be her son. But Greg had no knowledge of Abraham's actual whereabouts. He simply believed the millionaire was in hiding to avoid those searching for him. However, when investigators revealed the truth, that they suspected Abraham was dead and that Didi Moore might be responsible, Greg made a decision that changed everything. He agreed to cooperate with the police. Mid-January, 2 weeks after Greg Smith agreed to cooperate, the Polk County Sheriff held a shocking press conference. He announced that the disappearance of Abraham Shakespeare was now considered a murder case, and the prime suspect was Didi Moore. Didi reacted with complete surprise, claiming she was utterly shocked by the accusation. But just a few days later, she proactively reached out to Greg Smith, and that was her biggest mistake. Greg immediately reported to the investigators, and they quickly devised a trap. They instructed Greg to call Didi back, mentioning someone with a drug-related criminal record in the federal system, someone who could take the fall for Abraham's death. Didi took the bait instantly. She wanted a meeting. On January 21, the meeting took place. But there was one thing Didi was unaware of. The man she believed would take the blame for her was actually an undercover police officer. During the meeting, Didi was cautious but couldn't entirely hide the truth. She insisted that the police were trying to set her up, but vaguely admitted that Abraham was dead. However, she also added something strange. He will return. He will return on Christmas. But then Didi revealed her true nature. She offered to pay the man to take the blame. She was willing to pay any amount, but the undercover officer didn't stop there. He continued to press her, pushing Didi to reveal details about the murder and the location of Abraham's body. Didi hesitated, but eventually said, "Let me see if I can find out." That sentence was enough to mark a turning point in the investigation. The trap was closing in, and Didi Moore's time was running out. 4 days later, on January 25, Didi Moore arranged another meeting with Greg Smith. But this time, she didn't just bring words, she brought deadly evidence. In her hands was a .38 caliber Wesson revolver. She handed it to Greg without hesitation. Then she drove to a house in Plant City, a house she had purchased using Abraham Shakespeare's money. Upon arrival, Didi pointed to a specific spot and coldly said, "His body is right here." Greg Smith knew he had just obtained the most crucial piece of evidence. He immediately reported to the Polk County Sheriff. Less than 24 hours later, investigators arrived, quietly beginning excavation, while dozens of reporters from across Central Florida watched their every move. The search lasted nearly 48 hours. And then, on January 28, the horrifying truth was finally revealed. Abraham Shakespeare's body had been found. Identified through fingerprints, the medical examiner concluded that Abraham had been shot twice in the chest. As the news spread, grief filled the air. His family was present at the scene, their cries echoing through the crowd, "God will bring justice." But investigators didn't have to look far for the prime suspect. The moment Abraham's body was discovered, Didi Moore did something no one expected. She called the police herself. "We need to talk." At the investigation office, Didi gave a dramatic account. She claimed that the person who killed Abraham wasn't her, but a man named Ronald. According to Didi, one night in April, Abraham walked into her office with Ronald and another drug dealer. They demanded money from a safe, but everything quickly spiraled out of control. Abraham argued with them. Then they shot him. Didi continued, claiming that the killers took all the money from the safe, forced her to transfer more, and even pointed a gun at her face. "I was so scared," she emphasized, trying to convince investigators that she was just another victim. But this time, no one believed her anymore. Didi's story might change, but the evidence did not. The interrogation ended, and shortly after, the Polk and Hillsborough County Police worked together to finalize the arrest warrant. Since Abraham Shakespeare's body was found, reporters had swarmed the crime scene. But they didn't stop there. They also camped outside Didi Moore's house, waiting for any movement from the woman suspected of being a murderer. Then, on February 2, surrounded by cameras, Didi finally emerged. No more avoiding, no more hiding, she faced the media. A defiant, yet emotional Didi. Sometimes, everyone has moments of feeling terrible. She choked. She cried, her voice trembling. But were those tears of remorse, or just another performance? After her final words, Didi got into her car, preparing to leave as dozens of cameras captured every moment. But she didn't know that this ride wouldn't take her home. The moment she started her car, she was blocked. Police swarmed in. Right then and there, Didi Moore was officially arrested, charged with first-degree murder. Tampa, Florida, November 28, 2012. Under the glaring lights of the Hillsborough County courtroom, Didi Moore was led in. The once glamorous woman with golden blonde hair now looked more haggard than ever after nearly 3 years in custody. Today, she stood trial for the most ruthless crime, murder for money. Prosecutors wasted no time, opening with a sharp statement. Didi Moore took advantage of Abraham Shakespeare's kindness, easily manipulating him due to his lack of financial knowledge. And when she could no longer drain him of money, she chose the quickest and most ruthless way to take everything by killing him. To prove this, they called a financial expert who had meticulously analyzed every account belonging to Didi Moore and Abraham himself. Bank statements, checks, and transactions showed that by the spring of 2009, Didi had complete control over Abraham's remaining lottery winnings. She spent lavishly like a queen: Dom Perignon champagne, Rolex watches, diamond jewelry, a $90,000 Corvette, and luxurious vacations from Las Vegas to New York. But the key turning point in the case came on December 5, when a crucial witness, Abraham's former personal assistant, took the stand. She recounted that in late March 2009, Abraham had frantically come to her. He told her he had tried to withdraw money from the bank, but discovered that his account had been emptied. Completely devastated, Abraham realized that his financial advisor, the person he had trusted, was actually the one who had stolen all his remaining money. Determined not to stay silent, this witness called Didi directly, confronting her about the fact that Abraham had discovered the truth. Just a few days later, on April 6, 2009, Abraham Shakespeare vanished forever. Although there were no direct witnesses to the murder, prosecutors believed they had pieced together enough evidence to reconstruct the chilling truth of how Didi Moore murdered Abraham Shakespeare. They admitted that no one had seen the exact moment Didi pulled the trigger, but her own words had inadvertently provided a solid theory. Didi had told investigators that a mysterious drug cartel had shot Abraham right in her office and stolen all the money from the safe. But prosecutors asserted no such cartel existed. There was only Didi Moore and Abraham Shakespeare. According to the prosecution's theory, on that fateful day, Abraham had gone to Didi's office. As he walked in, she opened the safe, making it seem as if she was about to give him his money. But instead of pulling out a stack of cash, she took out a gun. 2 gunshots rang out. Abraham collapsed. Then Didi began erasing the evidence. A search of her office after her arrest revealed crucial evidence. A portion of the carpet had been cut out, and when analyzed, investigators found traces of blood soaked into the floor. DNA analysis confirmed it was Abraham Shakespeare's blood. The final and most damning piece of evidence, the .38 caliber revolver that Didi had given to Greg Smith, the police informant. When examined, the bullets recovered from Abraham's body were a perfect match for that gun. On December 10, 2012, the Florida jury delivered its final verdict in the trial of Didi Moore. The former nursing assistant and 40-year-old businesswoman was convicted of first-degree murder. After days of intense deliberation, they needed no more time to consider. The decision was clear. Didi Moore was found guilty of murdering Abraham Shakespeare. Her sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. From a woman who once lived lavishly off her victim's fortune, Didi Moore now faced the rest of her life behind bars, a place with no diamonds, no luxury cars, and no more lies to cover up her crime. Ruby in Ruffalo, a sharp mind, she almost achieved straight A's in law school. Her husband John was no less intelligent, but tragedy struck when he mysteriously died. John's death sparked an investigation filled with shocking accusations, and chilling secrets gradually came to light. It was as if a voice from beyond was guiding the truth into the light. Can a dead man speak? Or is someone playing a dangerous game? Amid the grief of widowhood and the whirlwind of legal battles, Ruby was forced to fight, not only to seek justice for her husband, but also to protect her own freedom. Langford, British Columbia, October 25, 2003. After a week of relentless rain, a hiker followed a trail in Mount Wells Regional Park, on the outskirts of Victoria. The narrow path ran parallel to an old, abandoned drainage pipe. As he stepped down near the pipe, he suddenly froze. Something looked strange. Emerging from the darkness of the pipe, something sent a chill down his spine. A hand. His heart pounding. The hiker realized he had just stumbled upon a corpse. Without hesitation, he immediately called 911. Within minutes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the scene. The body of a white male, in his mid-30s, was discovered in the West Shore area of Langford. No identification, no visible wounds. He hadn't been stabbed. He hadn't been shot. But what had killed him? The victim's identity was quickly confirmed. John Ruffalo, 36 years old, who had been reported missing 5 days earlier by none other than his wife, Ruby. Ruby Anjuba was born in 1956 in a remote community in Terrace, British Columbia. From a young age, she showed intelligence and promise, enrolling at the University of Victoria. However, upon arriving in Victoria, a familiar pattern began to emerge in her life. Ruby dropped out, got married, quickly divorced, and then fell into a new relationship. Unfortunately, both relationships were fraught with abuse. Each romance left her with a child, and by the age of 30, Ruby was struggling to raise 4 children on her own. Life became increasingly difficult, and in 1986 she decided to return to her family's farm in Terrace. But 2 years later, in 1988, she left once again, this time returning to Victoria without her children. Back in the city, Ruby was determined to change her life. She went back to school, completed her degree, and it was there that she met John Ruffalo, a man 11 years younger than her. Despite the age gap, they quickly formed a bond. John was outgoing, charismatic, and passionate, while Ruby was drawn to his warmth and devotion. In April 1990, they got married. Ruby's children from previous relationships remained with their family, while she and John built a new home together, welcoming a daughter. Although Ruby had a university degree and John did not, she chose to stay home to care for their child while John became the family's breadwinner, working hard to support them. As Ruby continued to pursue her education, John became increasingly involved in real estate. However, studying law was never easy, and life wasn't always smooth. In 1998, shortly after Ruby graduated from law school, John suddenly faced charges for violating the Real Estate Act of British Columbia. Once again, turmoil struck, presenting new challenges for their marriage. John eventually broke the law and was convicted of 22 offenses. However, instead of serving prison time, he was only fined $14,000 and forced to give up his job as a prison guard. Meanwhile, Ruby's career was also struggling. Despite graduating from law school, she found herself unemployed, unable to secure a foothold in the industry. Marital tensions escalated. The relationship between Ruby and John became so distant that they no longer even shared the same bed. Long work days and the pressures of life made the household atmosphere suffocating. Even their 12-year-old daughter, Giovanna, could sense the growing rift between her parents. That summer, John seemed increasingly detached from his family. One night, he bluntly asked his daughter, "Do you want me to leave?" Giovanna, though still a child, understood that her parents' marriage was on the verge of collapse. Yet John promised her that he wouldn't go, but that promise didn't last long. Not long after, John mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind unanswered questions. On the evening of October 19, 2003, just before 11 p.m., the shift manager at Brink Security called Ruby Ann Ruffalo. His voice was tense as he asked, "Where's John? He didn't show up for work." Ruby was confused. She didn't know where John was. Over the phone, her bewilderment was as evident as the manager's concern. But the real worry began the next morning when John still hadn't returned home. Ruby started feeling uneasy. She turned to Vivian Kirkland, a close friend who lived in the basement apartment of her house. The two women quickly went to the police station to report John missing, but the police remained unfazed. They told Ruby not to worry because John had been missing for less than 24 hours. "Maybe he just got drunk somewhere and will be home soon," they reassured her. However, the day passed with no sign of John. By evening, when the 24-hour mark since his disappearance was reached, his family and friends were genuinely alarmed. John's phone rang non-stop. Messages flooded in. Ruby seemed to be spiraling into panic. One of her tenants recalled that she paced back and forth incessantly, so anxious she was nearly frantic. By October 22, 2 days after John was reported missing, his family began to believe that something terrible had happened. That afternoon, John's brother-in-law was refueling at a local gas station when he suddenly recognized a familiar-looking car. As he moved closer to inspect it, he confirmed it was John's car. But John was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, his brother-in-law immediately called the police. When officers searched the vehicle, they found a suspicious detail. John's wallet was still inside, along with his identification. This raised a series of questions. Why would John abandon both his car and wallet? Where had he gone? And most importantly, what had really happened to him? The police immediately tried to contact Ruby to inform her of the discovery and to ask more about John. Strangely, it took them until the next day to reach her. Shortly afterward, the police received a call from Ruby's lawyer. He said that Ruby wanted to meet with them and was willing to assist in the investigation. When Ruby arrived at the police station, she wasn't alone. Beside her was Vivian Kirkland, her loyal friend. During the interview, Ruby explained that Vivian was there for emotional support, while her lawyer accompanied her to ensure everything proceeded properly. When asked about her husband's disappearance, Ruby admitted that it was highly unusual. "John would usually call me or leave a message," she said. But then she followed with an even more shocking claim. John might have been involved in a dark secret. According to Ruby, John had a habit of using drugs. She had even left him briefly because of it, but they eventually reconciled. However, she never fully trusted him. And just days before John went missing, Ruby claimed she had found evidence to support her suspicions. While cleaning the house, she discovered that John had hidden a large sum of cash, $7, taped to the back of a cabinet. But when the police searched Ruby and John's home, they found no trace of the cash she had mentioned. The $7 had vanished, and so had John. Was this merely a coincidence? Or did John have a real reason to hide the money? Were drug dealers hunting him down? A new theory began to emerge. Perhaps John was on the run due to debts owed to drug traffickers. But to the police, this scenario seemed unconvincing. John's family didn't believe it either. As investigators continued to track and verify Ruby's statements, they noticed a major issue. There was no evidence to suggest that John was a drug addict. A heavy user couldn't possibly manage 3 jobs at once. It was almost impossible. John's sister outright rejected this theory. "There's no way he would just leave," she insisted, worry etched across her face. And as each day passed without any sign of John, his family began to fear the worst. Saturday, October 25, 6 days after John's disappearance, a hiker descending from Mount Wells Regional Park stumbled upon a horrifying sight. the body of a man inside an old drainage culvert. Panicked, he immediately called 911. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly arrived at the scene, calling in a crime scene analyst to assist with the situation. As investigators pulled the body from the culvert, they compared it to a photo in the missing persons file. The results confirmed the family's worst fears. The deceased man was John Ruffalo. The grief of losing him was already devastating, but the way he was found left his family even more haunted. What had killed him? At first glance, the body showed no signs of beating or obvious violence. Hoping to find answers, investigators hiked up the mountain to what was believed to be the entrance of the culvert. There, they discovered discarded drug paraphernalia. This evidence seemed to align with Ruby's claim that John was a drug user. But was it really true? Had John overdosed and died tragically? The police weren't entirely convinced. Something felt off. Drug addicts didn't typically wander into the woods to inject themselves. And if John had truly been an addict, why did none of his family and friends believe it? On the night of October 26, 2003, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police knocked on the door of Ruby Ann Ruffalo's home in the suburbs of Victoria. Just a day earlier, a hiker had discovered the body of her missing husband, John Ruffalo. He was only 36 years old. Ruby had reported John missing 6 days prior. Just 2 days before his body was found, she had told investigators that John was a drug addict, possibly in debt, and even suggested that he might have taken his own life due to the pressures of drugs and money. At first glance, John's death seemed to align with Ruby's statement. But was that really the case? While John's family and friends mourned his loss, investigators began asking questions. An initial theory suggested that John might have taken his own life with drugs. But there was a major problem. Many details didn't add up. If John had truly walked up the mountain to inject himself, why was his car found abandoned more than 8 miles away? And if John hadn't gone there himself, then who had taken his body up the mountain? The next question, who had done it? On October 28, 2003, an unexpected witness came forward, providing police with a shocking statement. This witness was Robert Johnson, a man struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that Ruby Ann Ruffalo, along with her close friend Vivian Kirkland, had approached him and offered him an $8 bottle of sherry, a cheap bribe, but one tempting enough for someone like Johnson. But the most shocking part was Ruby's request. She wanted him to do a special job, a gruesome task, to kill John Ruffalo. Johnson recounted that he had immediately refused. However, Ruby didn't give up. She listened to Johnson's suggestion for a more discreet method of murder, a hot shot, a lethal overdose of heroin, ensuring the victim's death without leaving any trace of foul play. This statement could not be taken lightly. Police recalled what Ruby had previously claimed, that John was a drug addict. They had also found drug paraphernalia near where John's body had been discovered. Everything was starting to connect into a suspicious plot. But Johnson's story wasn't over. He went on to reveal that on the night of October 19, the night John disappeared, Ruby had contacted him again. When Johnson arrived at her house, he was shocked to see Ruby and Vivian Kirkland standing in the driveway with John's lifeless body. Ruby had offered him more alcohol in exchange for his help disposing of the corpse. But once again, Johnson refused. He walked away, leaving Ruby and Vivian standing there with a dead body and a dark secret. If Johnson's story was true, this was a premeditated murder. But what puzzled the police was the motive. If Ruby truly wanted her husband dead, why had she only offered Johnson a cheap bottle of wine? And for someone with a law degree like Ruby, why would she attempt to recruit a homeless alcoholic to carry out her plan? As police were still considering the credibility of Robert Johnson's testimony, 2 more unexpected witnesses came forward, making the case even more disturbing. This time, it was Jonathan Horton, an 18-year-old, and his mother, Linda, a former tenant of the Ruffalo family. Linda revealed a shocking truth. More than a year and a half before John's disappearance, Ruby Ann Ruffalo had approached her son and offered him money to kill her husband. Jonathan told the police that he had immediately refused. But instead of letting it go, Jonathan's mother, Linda, confronted Ruby directly. Ruby's reaction? Not a single denial. In fact, according to Linda, Ruby even repeated the offer to her, offering to pay her to kill John Ruffalo. And once again, the offer was rejected. This revelation raised a puzzling question. If John knew that his wife had plotted to kill him, why did he continue living with her for another year and a half? Any ordinary person who discovered their spouse wanted them dead would immediately go to the police or leave. But John didn't. The reason might lie in another secret one that John's mother revealed to the police. John Ruffalo had been having an affair, and he was planning to file for divorce. Toxicology results seemed to confirm Robert Johnson's account of a hot shot, a lethal dose of heroin strong enough to kill instantly. But there was an even more crucial detail. Although Ruby had claimed John was a drug addict, there were no signs of chronic drug use. Only a single needle mark was found on John's arm. This suggested that the fatal heroin dose could have been his first and only injection, one that someone else had administered. Not only that, but heroin wasn't the only substance found in John's body. Tests also detected amitriptyline, a drug that can cause paralysis and render a victim defenseless. Could Ruby have mixed the drug into John's food or drink, knocking him unconscious before injecting him with heroin? The only problem was, how could police prove it? On March 3, 2004, the investigation into John Ruffalo's mysterious death took a critical turn. Police searched Ruby's home, including the basement apartment of Vivian Kirkland, her close friend and a potential accomplice. There they found a prescription and a bottle of amitriptyline in Vivian's room. A chilling coincidence. This was the exact drug found in John Ruffalo's body during the autopsy. On March 4, 2004, Canadian police returned to Ruby Ruffalo's home. This time, they weren't just there to gather more evidence, they were there to arrest both Ruby and Vivian Kirkland. Ruby Ruffalo, the prime suspect, was completely stunned as the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She didn't utter a word, but the shock was evident on her face. Soon after, both women were taken to the police station. As the interrogation room door closed, Ruby remained eerily composed. She refused to make any statements and immediately requested a lawyer, a classic move for someone well-versed in the law. But Vivian Kirkland was different. Held in the interrogation room next door, Ruby's closest friend became the center of the investigation. Detectives were determined to uncover her true role in John Ruffalo's death. At first, Vivian tried to deny any involvement, but how long could she stay silent when the evidence against her kept piling up? On March 3, 2009, nearly 6 years after John Ruffalo's body was found in the woods outside Victoria, British Columbia, and almost 5 years after Ruby Ruffalo's arrest, she finally stood trial for her husband's murder. John's family had waited far too long for justice, and what angered them most was that Ruby had spent nearly 5 years out on bail, free as if nothing had happened. With a law degree from one of Canada's top universities, Ruby knew the legal system inside and out, and perhaps she had used that knowledge to delay the case, hoping it would fade into obscurity. But Judgment Day had come. That morning in court, the prosecutor opened the trial with a statement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ruby Ruffalo had killed her husband because he was leaving her. But this was not just a crime of passion. John had planned to divorce her, and that meant dividing assets, a prospect Ruby could not accept. To her, everything they owned, from real estate investments to every dollar in their bank accounts, belonged to her, not to John. And when she realized she might lose it all, Ruby took action. But the prosecutor had more than just a theory. They had a crucial witness, someone who had once been Ruby's most loyal accomplice, Vivian Kirkland. After years of protecting Ruby, standing by her side like a shadow, Vivian finally broke under the weight of the investigation. She testified exposing the entire murder plot that Ruby had orchestrated. With overwhelming evidence, on November 18, 2010, the judge delivered the final verdict. Ruby Ruffalo was guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence, life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. After nearly 8 years of uncertainty, pain, and despair, John's family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Justice had been served. The man they loved, a husband, a son, a brother, had not died in silence. Though nothing could ever replace their loss, at least they knew that the perpetrator had been rightfully punished. Karen Newell always knew how to attract men, and her new husband was no exception. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to have it all. Their marriage appeared happy, but just 9 months later, tragedy struck. Her husband was murdered right before her eyes in a brutal robbery. The attackers demanded his wallet, but something felt off. Everything seemed too staged, too perfect to be just a random mugging. Was this truly a simple carjacking? Or was the killer a jealous lover, lurking in the shadows? The deeper the police dug, the more suspicious they became. Was this marriage truly built on love? Or was it from the start a perfect facade to hide a ruthless plan? A plan where the price to be paid was John's life. Orange County, Florida, late night, February 20, 1994. On a desolate highway between Cocoa Beach and Orlando, a car suddenly pulled over. In the dim headlights of passing vehicles, a young woman frantically waved her hands, pleading for help. She approached every car that slowed down, and whenever someone stopped, she uttered only one sentence: "Help me. My husband has been shot." Her name was Karen Newell, and the man lying motionless on the pavement, drenched in blood, was her husband, John. He had been shot multiple times. Several drivers stopped to try and help, but it was too late. When the sheriff arrived at the scene just minutes later, he confirmed what everyone feared: John was dead. According to Karen, that night, she and her husband were driving back home to Orlando after a long day at the beach when their car started having issues. When John stepped out to check under the hood, a small sedan pulled up behind them. 3 men were inside. At first, Karen thought they were stopping to help, but no 2 of them stepped out and immediately demanded John's wallet. Karen recalled that the robbery happened too fast. 1 second, they were simply asking for money, and the next, John collapsed to the ground, shot multiple times. The attackers jumped back into their car, sped off, and left her husband bleeding out by the roadside. But the most horrifying part wasn't just the immediate loss. Karen was pregnant. The killers didn't just take John's life. They took away the father of her unborn child. Karen Newell didn't have an easy life. Growing up in hardship left a deep mark on her, but it couldn't extinguish the strong spirit of this young woman. Despite her captivating beauty, Karen's love life was far from smooth. By the end of her 20s, she had already been married and divorced twice. In the spring of 1993, at the age of 28, Karen seemed more focused on her career. The brunette wasn't just striving for success at work, she was also trying her luck in local beauty pageants, hoping to chase her dream of becoming a model. But perhaps Karen's true stroke of luck didn't come from the runway. It came from a small bar in the suburbs of Orlando. That was where she met John Newell. From the first glance, Karen might have been drawn to the tall man with striking blue eyes. But John wasn't just handsome, he was a master mechanic with a good salary, 2 cars of his own, and a decent amount of savings. That night, John took Karen home, but their connection wasn't just a fleeting romance. He was captivated by her beauty, charm, and perhaps something mysterious that set her apart. As for Karen, she too was swept up in the whirlwind romance with John. Before long, their relationship became more serious than ever. On May 22, 1993, just 2 months after their passionate first night, John and Karen decided to get married. Everything happened so quickly, but both seemed to believe they had found their soulmate. After the wedding, Karen excitedly shared with John about a new career opportunity. She claimed that thanks to her connections in the modeling industry, she had landed a job involving television product promotions. This meant a packed schedule, frequent travel, and constant busyness. But Karen reassured her husband that no matter where she went, she would always come back to him. 7 months into their marriage, Karen announced joyful news. She was pregnant with their first child. John was overwhelmed with happiness. He eagerly awaited the moment he would become a father, believing that the baby's arrival would bring them closer than ever. Sean, a close friend of John's, once said that John loved Karen deeply. He always made an effort to keep the romance alive in their relationship. Just days after Valentine's Day in 1994, the couple even planned a short getaway to the beach, a way to enjoy some sweet moments together before their child was born. But no one could have predicted that this would be one of their last moments together. On Sunday morning, February 20, John and Karen packed their bags, got in their car, and drove an hour east to the beach. They spent the entire day enjoying the fresh ocean breeze before heading back to Orlando in the evening. But as they passed the toll booth at exactly 5:28 p.m. and turned onto State Road 520, things took a strange turn. The car suddenly showed signs of malfunction. John and Karen decided to pull over. John stepped out to check, but within seconds, a horrifying event unfolded. Late Sunday night, February 20, 1994, in Orange County, Florida, a brutal murder occurred on a desolate highway outside Orlando. The victim was John Newell, 29, husband of Karen Newell. By the time police arrived at the scene, John was already dead. His distraught wife, Karen, recounted to detectives that their car had broken down, and just as John stepped out to inspect it, a strange vehicle suddenly pulled up beside them. 3 men got out demanding John's wallet, but in the blink of an eye, according to Karen, one of them pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots at her husband. Despite being in shock, Karen was able to provide police with crucial details. She described the attackers' appearances, their car, and even remembered part of the license plate, along with a distinctive bad boy sticker on the rear window. Police immediately issued an urgent alert and launched a manhunt for the killers. Based on the .22 caliber shell casings found at the scene, investigators determined that the 3 suspects were armed and extremely dangerous. However, one odd detail stood out. The assailants had fled so quickly that they left behind John's wallet, the very thing they had demanded in the first place. That night, law enforcement focused on tracking down the car with the bad boy sticker while also heading to the hospital to continue questioning Karen. She was still distraught but lucid enough to answer their questions. A complex case was beginning to unravel. According to Karen's statement, she and John had spent a joyful day at the beach, where they were later joined by a friend named P.J. Giffen. P.J. was not just a friend, but also Karen's assistant, helping her with film production work. After a long day in the sun and waves, the 3 of them left Karen and John in one car, while P.J. drove separately. On the way back to Orlando, Karen claimed she had been following P.J.'s car, but lost sight of him after passing a toll booth. It was then that her car started malfunctioning, with the steering wheel shaking abnormally. John, a skilled mechanic, told Karen to pull over so he could take a look. Karen stated that they both got out of the car. She walked around to check the wheels, while John inspected under the hood. At that moment, another car suddenly approached from behind. Karen, who was crouched near the front of their vehicle, didn't see everything clearly. Then, gunshots rang out. In the chaos, Karen took cover near the front of the car, confused and terrified by what was happening. She initially thought it was just a robbery, but what she couldn't understand was why the attackers murdered John and then left without taking his wallet. Instead of immediately suspecting the grieving widow of lying, investigators chose to explore other possible leads. Instead of rushing to accuse the newly widowed Karen of lying, investigators decided to broaden their investigation. A police report revealed that not long before John was murdered, there had been an attempted break-in at the Newells' home. Around 9 p.m. that night, as darkness settled outside, Karen heard strange noises coming from the backyard. She immediately alerted John, but as he stepped outside to check, he was suddenly ambushed by two masked men wielding baseball bats. They brutally attacked him, leaving him in a terrible state. Fortunately, a neighbor heard the commotion and turned on their lights, scaring off the assailants. Karen quickly called 911. Though John was not seriously injured, he was unable to provide any useful information beyond the fact that someone had apparently tried to break into their home. At the time, the incident was dismissed as a failed burglary. However, when John was murdered just a few months later, the break-in took on a far more sinister implication. Investigators began interviewing John's friends and family, but no one could point to any known enemies. John was known as a kind-hearted man, always willing to help others. Yet a surprising detail emerged recently. John had taken in a new roommate, none other than Peter P.J. Giffen, Karen's assistant. What raised eyebrows even more was that P.J. had moved in right after the break-in, and according to accounts, it was Karen who had suggested it. "Why don't we let my young assistant move in? He's such a nice guy." John, trusting and easygoing, agreed without hesitation. But now, police began asking a critical question. Was there something suspicious between Karen and PJ? Was their relationship more than what they let on? And if so, was John's death really a random robbery, or was there a deeper, more calculated crime at play? By late February 1994, a week had passed since Karen Newell had witnessed her husband's murder on a deserted stretch of highway outside Orlando, Florida. She claimed that the robbers had suddenly jumped out of their car, confronted John, and demanded his wallet. However, investigators from the Orange County Sheriff's Office were growing increasingly skeptical of her story. They began questioning the relationship between Karen and Peter P.J. Giffen. Were they really just friends? And was the child Karen was carrying truly John's? Shortly after the murder, police summoned P.J. for questioning. He partially corroborated Karen's story about the three of them spending the day at the beach. P.J. claimed that he had consumed 12 cans of daiquiri, smoked marijuana, and then driven home ahead of Karen and John. But when investigators traveled to P.J.'s hometown of Port St. Lucie and started digging, his story began to unravel. Contrary to Karen's claims, P.J. was not her production assistant. In reality, he was nearly jobless, a high school dropout, drifting aimlessly through life. John's friends had long suspected that P.J. and Karen were involved in something more than just friendship. But what shocked investigators even more was how their relationship had actually begun. In the summer of 1993 on Florida's Turnpike, P.J. happened to spot Karen driving alone with a pair of handcuffs in her car. Jokingly, he told her to cuff him. But instead of laughing it off, Karen gave him a sly smile and began flirting with the teenager. Before long, the two had plunged into a secret affair. But while Karen may have seen P.J. as nothing more than a reckless fling, P.J. believed it was true love. He even told friends that he was married to Karen, an absurd claim, but one that revealed much about his mindset. What intrigued police most was P.J.'s potential motive. If Karen was pregnant with his child, then John was the only obstacle standing in their way. And if that were true, P.J. had every reason to want John gone for good. Although confirming the affair between Karen and P.J. provided a clear motive, investigators still needed concrete evidence to link them to the murder. Specifically, they needed to locate the murder weapon, a .22 caliber gun, based on shell casings found at the scene. Over the following days, police questioned the couple's friends, but a shocking revelation came when they spoke with one of Karen's ex-husbands. They discovered something even more suspicious. P.J. wasn't the only man Karen had been involved with. She had remained in contact with her ex-husband and had even borrowed a gun from him. At the time, her request seemed reasonable to the former spouse, especially given that John had recently survived a brutal baseball bat attack. But the most incriminating detail? The gun Karen borrowed was a .22 caliber, the exact same type as the murder weapon. A simple ballistics test could confirm if this was the gun used in the killing. However, when police asked Karen's ex to turn over the firearm, they hit a roadblock. Karen had never returned it. Now investigators were certain she was involved in the crime. But rather than rushing to arrest her, they needed ironclad evidence that would hold up in court. As they dug deeper into her past, they unearthed another crucial detail. Back in 1989, Karen had a criminal record for credit card fraud. On February 28, 8 days after her husband's murder, Karen Newell was arrested by the Orange County Sheriff's Office for violating her probation. While she was in custody, investigators continued gathering evidence. They interviewed a man named Louis Aragona, Karen's stepbrother, and uncovered a bombshell revelation. According to Louis, as early as the summer of 1993, Karen had approached him with a chilling proposal. John had a $500 life insurance policy, and she wanted Louis to help plan his murder so she could cash in. Louis refused to take part in the shooting, but he revealed something even more disturbing. Karen had already attempted to kill John in November 1993 with P.J. Giffen as her accomplice. Their plan was to murder John in his own home. However, when P.J. attacked, John cried out in pain, prompting neighbors to turn on their lights and look outside. Fearing exposure, P.J. panicked and fled. Karen didn't give up. Just days after the failed attack, she again reached out to Louis, urging him to help her carry out the plan. Once again he refused, but P.J., he didn't. This revelation marked a major breakthrough in the investigation. If Louis's account was true, it proved that Karen and P.J. had conspired to kill John long before the supposed random robbery took place. By late March 1994, the case had reached a turning point. Acting on a search warrant, police discovered a safe in John's home, registered in Karen's name. Inside, they found a trove of financial documents, including all of John's life insurance policies. The most shocking find, a $500,000 life insurance policy with Karen as the sole beneficiary. Not only that, but investigators uncovered a damning fact. In the week following John's death, Karen had already begun withdrawing money from the insurance payouts. She showed no signs of grief. Instead, she had swiftly contacted the insurance companies, demanding the money. The evidence was undeniable. This was no random robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated murder for money scheme. On March 28, 1994, less than a month after P.J. Giffen's arrest, both Karen and her teenage lover were officially charged with the murder of John Newell. In the trial of Karen Newell, prosecutors painted a picture of a cunning woman who had planned her husband's murder from the very beginning of their relationship. They argued that Karen had set her sights on John Newell as early as March 1993, not for love, but for his life insurance money. Just weeks after their wedding in May 1993, she secured the first $250,000 policy, then continued adding more over their 9-month marriage. This ensured that when John died, Karen would become rich. But she needed someone else to pull the trigger, and Peter P.J. Giffen was the perfect pawn. According to prosecutors, Karen used her charm to manipulate P.J., a naive young man, turning him into a killer. She promised love, used sex as a weapon, and even lied about being pregnant with his child to deepen his involvement in the plot. But that lie unraveled the night John was killed. When Karen was taken to the hospital, doctors ran a pregnancy test. It was negative. Even more damning, her medical records revealed that she had previously undergone tubal ligation, making pregnancy impossible. With this mountain of evidence, prosecutors were convinced that Karen was not just guilty of murder, she was a cold-blooded mastermind willing to do anything to get what she wanted. They sought the death penalty. The final piece of evidence came from P.J. Giffen's own testimony. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, he broke his silence in the interrogation room. He confessed everything: the affair, the murder plot, and how Karen had manipulated him into carrying it out. According to PJ, after their failed attempt to kill John with a baseball bat in November 1993, Karen immediately devised a new plan. On February 20, 1994, she, John, and PJ spent the day at the beach, enjoying themselves as if nothing was wrong. But on the drive back to Orlando, she created the perfect opportunity for PJ to strike. Karen drove ahead while PJ followed in his own car. After passing a toll booth, Karen pretended to have car trouble. She told John they needed to pull over and check the vehicle. As they stopped on the roadside, PJ, with the murder weapon in hand, approached. Without hesitation, he aimed the gun at John's head and said, "Consider this a divorce." Then he pulled the trigger. John collapsed, but PJ didn't stop. He fired 3 more shots into John's chest, ensuring he was dead. PJ's confession not only sealed Karen's fate, but also led investigators to the most critical piece of physical evidence, the murder weapon. He revealed that after the killing, he had tossed the gun into a lake a few miles from the crime scene. When police searched the designated area, they found the weapon. Ballistics tests confirmed it was the gun that fired the fatal bullets, but the most damning evidence? The gun's serial number matched the firearm Karen had borrowed from her ex-husband before the attack. This directly linked her to the murder weapon, proving she had orchestrated every detail of her deadly plan. With PJ's testimony, the recovered gun, and a clear financial motive, prosecutors had everything they needed to charge Karen with first-degree murder. Karen Newell's case was no longer a mystery. She had not only manipulated a teenager into killing for her, but had also calculated every move to ensure her plan's success. But would she receive the death penalty as prosecutors hoped? That decision lay in the hands of the jury. Facing overwhelming evidence, Karen Newell had no choice but to take a plea deal to avoid execution. The agreement between her defense and prosecutors spared her from the death sentence, but sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for PJ Giffen, despite being the one who pulled the trigger, his cooperation with authorities earned him a reduced charge of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, a price for being manipulated into Karen's deadly scheme. The case closed with both conspirators behind bars, but the tragedy remained. A man lost his life, all because of greed and the betrayal of a wife he had trusted.